Continuing in this series on esoteric symbols, I'd like to talk today about the Lion-Headed Serpent. Now we see this particular representation for the first time in an encyclopedia written by a Benedictine monk. It wasn't a general encyclopedia, it was a compilation of figures representing various points in antiquity. So it was supposed to be a history book illustrated with various antique symbols. And this one over here, the Lion-Headed Serpent, is a symbol that I've certainly come across quite regularly in my esoteric researches. Well, I've never been surprised or baffled by it because I started off my journey into esotericism with this, the Nag Hammadi Library. Now, you may be aware of this. In 1945, a farmer in the Nag Hammadi region of Egypt was digging for fossilized fertilizer to use as fuel. And he found a jar, a sealed jar, which he first of all was afraid might contain some evil spirits. But then he thought maybe it contained something maybe valuable, and so he cracked it open, found a load of very old looking manuscripts, which he took home, and then he got back to work. By the time he got back to his home in the evening, he found that his mother had burnt a few of those manuscripts. You get your firewood however you can, I suppose, or your kindling at least. But realizing that they might actually have some value, he then sold them, and they got separated and distributed on the black market for some decades. Eventually they got gathered back up by some scholars, and they were translated, and the result is quite explosive, let's say. Let me show you what kinds of contents are in here. The Prayer of the Apostle Paul, the Apocrypha of James, Gospel of Truth, Treatise on the Resurrection, Tripartite Tractate, the Apocrypha of John, the Gospel of Thomas, Gospel of Philip. So a number of early Christian books which were rejected by the Nicene Council, and it was decided that they would not be part of the canon Bible. Nevertheless, they are fascinating and show a very different face of Christianity. And I first read the Apocrypha of John back in 2003, I guess it was. Of all places, it was the website that was advertising the second part of The Matrix. It had an entire section on philosophy, and that's where I found out about the Nag Hammadi for the first time. I searched for it, and the whole text was available online, and I was absolutely fascinated by this. It seemed so blasphemous at the time, but of course now I realize how central this was to the early Christians' way of thinking, or some early Christians' way of thinking at least. Now let me give you an idea of what the Apocrypha of John is. Well, the Apocrypha of John retells what happens before Genesis, basically. Genesis is, in many Christians' minds, the very beginning of the universe. But the Apocrypha of John gives a very different point of view, describing the beginning of all things, with the monad being the origin of all things, and this monad gives birth to a counterpart, a female counterpart, which is named in here is named Barbello, right here, Barbello, and then they give rise to many other entities, but they're all spiritual entities. And then there's this one entity named Sophia, which wants to create her own entity, doesn't get the permission from the origin, from the monad, and so decides to make this entity alone. when she saw the consequences of her desire, it changed to a form of a lion-faced serpent. And here it is. And its eyes were like lightning fires which flash. She cast it away from her, outside that place, that no one of the immortal ones might see it, for she had created it in ignorance. She surrounded it with a luminous cloud. She placed a throne in the middle of the cloud, that no one might see it except the Holy Spirit, who is called the Mother of the Living. And she called his name Yaldabaoth. Now then, Yaldabaoth goes on to create his own universe, right? And this universe that Yaldabaoth creates is the universe that we're all familiar with. He calls them aeons, right? So Yaldabaoth is the Archon, and the Archon creates aeons, so entities, of which we have Cain and Abel. Now the Archon, so this lion-faced serpent, this Archon, who is weak, has three names. The first name is Yaldabaoth, the second is Saklas, which means foolish, and the third is Samael, or blind god, basically, is what that means. Also, some people say that it means God of the blind. And he is impious in his arrogance, which is in him. For he says, I am God, and there is no other God beside me. For he is ignorant of his strength, the place from which he had come. So, the Gnostics, who used this text as the basis for their understanding of the universe, thought of this Yaldabaoth, this Demiurge, which means creator, or actually originally means, so demiurgos is the Greek word for artisan, right? But it then became just creator. So this is a symbol of the creator God. So the Gnostics are, by excellence, the ultimate dualists, right? There is matter and there is spirit. Matter is evil, spirit is good. And it's all about transcending matter and becoming fully spirit. And so this symbol is a representation simply of Yaldabaoth, the creator god, rather than the origin of all things, the creator of this material world, which is a parody of the ultimate reality, which was originally created by the origin of all things, the monad. Now, this all sounds very strange. I certainly sympathize with you if this feels very alien. But in fact, William Blake's thoughts on God and just theology in general will mirror this Gnostic theology very directly. We have here his very famous Ancient of Days, which is endlessly reproduced by Christians around the world to represent God. But what William Blake was actually doing here was showing us this Yaldabaoth. He called him Urizen or Urizen, and what he's got in his hand here is a compass, which was supposed to represent this demiurge, this demiurgos, entrapping life on Earth within these dimensions, right? Within these measurements. Now, William Blake's equivalent of Sophia, who then goes into the world to save mankind, right? To plant in each living being, at least in each human, a divine spark that can then return to the origin, to the monad. William Blake calls this Sophia-like protagonist Los, and there are several books of Los. There we go, the Song of Los, and so on. There we go. Now, another source that I particularly like on Gnosticism, although it's more of an introduction than anything very, very serious, but if it's your first contact with the idea of Gnosticism, then it's a great place to start. It's Philip K. Dick's semi-autobiographical book, Valis. I've got it here in a compilation. He goes quite deep into the Gnostic ideas. Here we go. The Gnostics believed that the created deity was insane, blind. I want to show you something. It hasn't been published yet. So this was at the time of writing, right? I have it in a typescript from Orville Wintermute, who is currently working with whoever in translating the Nag Hammadi codices. This quote comes from On the Origin of the World. Horse Lover Fat is the name of the protagonist. Read it to himself, holding the precious typescript. He said, "I am God, and no other one exists except me." But when he said these things, he sinned against all of the immortal, imperishable ones, and they protected him. Moreover, when Pistis Sophia, saw the impiety of the chief ruler, she was angry. Without being seen, she said, "You err, Samael," i.e. the blind god. "An enlightened immortal man exists before you. This will appear within your modelled bodies. He will trample upon you like potter's clay, which is trampled, and you will go with those who are yours down to your mother, the abyss." At once, Fat understood what he had read. Samael was the creator deity, and he imagined that he was the only god, as stated in Genesis. However, he was blind, which is to say, occluded. There we go. Philip K. Dick repeats over and over that humanity is trapped in an iron cage. So very much a Gnostic approach, a Gnostic point of view. There we go. The empire never ended. The empire being the Roman Empire, being the representation of the iron cage, being the representation of the creation of Yaldabaoth, the Demiurge, the creator god. There we go. And yes, and guys, I'll see you in the next video. Thanks ever so much for watching. Don't forget to leave a thumbs up and to subscribe down below if you haven't already. Take care. See you soon.